want to make it very clear in the beginning, I'm not anti-government. I don't believe in terrorism. And I want to make it especially clear that there are a lot of good people in the FBI and the CIA, naval intelligence, army intelligence, military intelligence, NSA. Unfortunately, there are a few key people in key positions who have made a difference, a big difference, in what's happening in America today. So, looking back, my personal experiences, I retired from the FBI March 1979. At that time, I was in charge of the FBI Los Angeles Division. I had more than 700 personnel under my command. The Attorney General of the United States, Griffin Bell, asked me after I retired if I'd coordinate security for the Pan American Games. I did. I was a consultant in the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. I was a consultant for former Governor Jerry Brown, California Narcotic Authority. When I retired, I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea about the Illuminati. I had no idea about Adam Weishaupt. However, my first major investigation when I returned from Puerto Rico was a Dr. Jeffrey R. McDonald case. He's a former Green Beret doctor who was convicted of murdering his wife and 2 children at Fort Bragg, February 17, 1970. He'd been tried and convicted and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. I was asked by the defense team to investigate the case because they claimed that Dr. McDonald was innocent. I said I would, but if I learned that he murdered his wife and 2 children, I would discontinue my investigation, no longer become involved. I want you to know I'm still working for Dr. McDonald. He is an innocent man. Now, once I became involved in the case, I had to read everything, and I learned that evidence was lost, evidence was stolen, evidence was altered. An FBI agent, Paul Stombaugh, lied before the grand jury, and most important of all, Colette, the wife, had skin where she had fought off the assailants under her fingernails. That skin was handed over to William F. Ivory, the chief investigator for the Army, and it has disappeared. 10 months into the case, October 25, 1980, I, through a series of circumstances, I don't have time to go into the details now, obtained a signed confession from one Helena Stokely. I had 3 sessions with her, 10 days each, total of 30 days. Helena told me that Dr. McDonald did not commit those crimes, that they were committed by her satanic cult group. And I said to myself, what's this all about? I don't know anything about Satanism. I read about it in the Bible, of course, and that's about it. But as I delved into the case, I learned that drugs from Southeast Asia were being flown into the United States to various military bases in plastic bags in the bodies of the dead GIs. I further learned from Helena that her satanic cult group was involved in distributing these drugs up and down the East Coast. They were mad at Dr. McDonald because he was abusive to the cult members and the GIs who went to the civilian hospital where he was moonlighting for relief of some sort. So they went in and attacked him that night. There were a total of 7 involved in the crime. She named them all for me. Right now, today, I know where some of them are located. But to further check and document this, I went to the UCLA library, and I found out, in fact, in the Time magazine, January 1, 1973, there was an article about bringing drugs in plastic bags in the body cavities of dead GIs. There was no question in my mind Helena was telling the truth. I gave her a polygraph test and she passed. I had her examined by a psychiatrist and she passed. And as a matter of fact, the government themselves had given her a polygraph examination early in their investigation before I entered the case. And Byzantine, the Army polygraph operator, said that she thought that she was telling the truth. She thought she was there that night. Now, the most recent series of events in the McDonald case, now I'm telling you a little bit about the McDonald case because that's what woke me up as to what was going on. It was after that I started researching and went back and found out about the Illuminati. From the McDonald case, the next case I worked of a major consequence was the McMartin preschool case in Manhattan Beach, California. The children there claimed there were tunnels under the school. They were taken into the tunnels and through the tunnels up into the trap door of a bathroom in a triplex next door, placed in automobiles, and prostituted in the community. These are 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old children before they entered kindergarten. In addition, the children claimed that they were flown into the mountains where they were involved with adults in robes, black robes, chanting, candles. They talked about the brown babies who were cut up, actually sacrificed. And in checking into this and researching this, of course, this was obviously a satanic ceremony. The McMartin family, who owned the preschool, they were tried of Ray Buckey and his grandmother. The grandmother was acquitted, hung jury on Ray Buckey. The second trial, another hung jury. I had an opportunity in 1990 to gain control of the school. Now, the school had been given to Danny Davis, the defense attorney, and he had sold it, even though he made $15 million on the case, by the way. He had sold it to a contractor who was going to tear it down. When I learned this, I contacted the contractor. I said, I want to be given an opportunity to go on that school and look for the tunnels. The authorities had looked for them in 1987. They said they could find no tunnels. Along with some of the parents, we hired Dr. Gary Stickle, UCLA archaeologist. He hired his crew and brought them in. And in 34 days, Dr. Stickle said there had been tunnels under that school. They were covered up and they were covered in. An informant of mine told me that there was an abandoned satanic site in Crestline, California, up in the mountains. I went up into the mountains and obtained photographs, of the site. I have a lecture that I give where these pictures are available. It's called Gunderson Chronicles number 2. It's a 4-hour lecture that I gave in Kansas City a number of years ago, which shows this abandoned site and also pictures from the McMartin Tunnel school dig. From there, I became involved in another case, very frightening case, because I established, with the help of people like John DeCamp, former state senator in Nebraska, that we have in this country today a covert military criminal enterprise, government enterprise, primarily by U.S. military intelligence, that is operating full throttle, and everybody refuses to investigate it. In the Nebraska case, it's called the Franklin Cover-Up. This is the book here that John DeCamp wrote, by the way. It's all documented in there. And in that particular instance, they were taking children out of foster homes, orphanages, Boys Town, driving them from Omaha, Nebraska to Sioux City, Iowa, 184 miles away, placing them in private jets and flying them to Washington, D.C. for sex orgies with prominent people, including congressmen, senators, and certain people in the White House. It's well documented. I have personally talked to Paul Benassi. I had a 5-hour interview with him. It's a tape that's available. I don't have it with me here, but you can order it. I have a 5-hour interview with Paul that he gave me in 1993. Paul told me how he was used. He was part of the kidnapping crew and was used as a decoy when he was 10, 11, 12 years old in parks, shopping malls, to attract the children over near where the adults were in a car waiting for them. They throw them in the back seat, chloroform them, and make off with them. Paul also told me that these children, many of them become sex slaves. Many of them are used as toys. The boys, they call the boys toys. I don't know what they call the girls. But these degenerate, sick people, the men are more interested in the little boys than they are the girls for some reason. But it's all well documented. Paul drew the inside living quarters of the White House. Now, this information broke in about 1987. That's about right after I entered, just before I entered the case. I replaced a fellow named Gary Caradori, who was the investigator for a Nebraska Senate committee. Gary met the official photographer of the group, who had split from the group, defected, and agreed to take the pictures that this official photographer gave him, and they met in Chicago, agreed to take the pictures back to the committee. He flew out of Chicago in his private plane, a short distance out of Chicago. The plane exploded midair, and his briefcase has never been found. He and his 11-year-old boy died. His briefcase has never been found. The rear seat of the airplane has never been found. I made every attempt possible to obtain possession of or control of that plane, because I wanted to examine it for bomb chemicals, particularly the back seat. It's no longer available. Nobody knows what happened to it. Gary Caradori was a civilian, yet it was taken to a military base for examination. A deputy sheriff was the first one on the scene. He saw the pictures. He started picking up the pictures. An FBI agent came along, took the pictures away from him, told him to keep his mouth shut. He started talking to a few people. A year later, his wife was murdered. He's no longer talking. This international child kidnapping ring, I later learned, was out of Washington, D.C. It was very active, and the organization is known as the Finders. And I have a report on the Finders back there. Everything I'm telling you is documented, by the way. The Finders has been established and operating throughout the 1960s up to the present time. It was exposed in 1987. They moved their operation to Wichita, Kansas, and they're operating right today in Wichita, Kansas. I have taken my report to the FBI half a dozen times, demanded an investigation, and I have yet to be interviewed. So we have the Finders, we have the Franklin cover-up, which documents what I'm telling you. We have the pawns in the game. Pawns in the game is the Illuminati. This is the Illuminati/satanic movement in this country today. And the last thing I'm going to mention in the way of a book is why Johnny can't come home. Johnny Gosch was, September the 5th, 1982, a newspaper boy on a Sunday, and he was about to deliver his newspapers in West Des Moines, Iowa. He never delivered any newspapers. He disappeared. The mother, Noreen Gosch, was dumbfounded, didn't know what happened, demanded an investigation of the FBI and by the West Des Moines Police Department. The chief of police in West Des Moines said to her, even though he's disappeared, we do not have any witnesses who saw him being grabbed and placed in a car or being taken control of. So we're not going to investigate it. The FBI used the same premise. They refused to investigate it. Now, I've been involved in kidnappings in the FBI, and I can tell you that it's automatic within 24 hours, at the end of 24 hours, that we had to go in my day, this was back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we had to go in and start investigating the case after they've disappeared for 24 hours. Today, as I stand here and you sit there, the children are disappearing in this country at the rate of 83 per hour. That's over 700,000 children a year. Now, I can go back to July 1982. The Reader's Digest claimed there were 100,000 children disappearing every year. There's another statistic that I find very interesting, and that is that it is estimated 2,500 children are kidnapped and murdered in this country every year. That's an unbelievable figure. Yet, the FBI refuses to investigate it. Now, after the Nebraska case, and part of the Nebraska case, most recently, we have a young man named Jeff Gannon, who has appeared in the White House using a fraudulent press pass. This has happened within the last month. Certain people in the White House were questioning him and were suspicious of him because when he would engage in a press conference with the president, President Bush, he was asking what they call soft questions. Soft questions meaning the president would have an answer for them, he'd look good. Somebody started checking into his background. They learned that he was actually an individual named Jim Guckert. This is all on the internet, by the way. And Guckert had a homosexual website. So Jeff Gannon is an alias of Jim Guckert. Now, his picture appeared in the internet, and he is believed to be Johnny Gosch, who was kidnapped September the 5, 1982. The mother, Noreen Gosch, who wrote this book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, I have a 2-hour interview with her on video, available again if you want to check my order blank. She did not sit still for this. Can you imagine if the 83 mothers of children who disappear every hour would do what Noreen Gosch has done? We wouldn't have this problem today. She went to the FBI, demanded an investigation. They refused to investigate. The police refused to investigate because the case tied into the Franklin cover-up. Some of our top politicians in the country, leading businessmen. Harold Anderson was identified by the children, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald. The head of the Nebraska Forestry Service was identified by these children. There 80 children came forward in this Nebraska case. And it goes, as I said, right up to the White House. In 1987, according to Paul Benassi, he was furnishing toys, or little boys, young boys, to the sick people, certain sick individuals in the White House itself. I have the names of some of these people. No need to mention it here. Some of them are mentioned in the Franklin cover-up. But it does appear that Jeff Gannon is, in fact, Johnny Gosch. Noreen Gosch, the mother, has looked at the pictures. She believes it's Johnny Gosch because He has a scar on his right cheek about the size of a nickel. It's white. Gannon has a scar there also. Little Johnny Gosch had a birthmark on his left chest about 8 inches long. From looking at pictures of Jeff Gannon on the internet, it appears that he had a birthmark at one time, and there's been an attempt to erase it. I personally talked to one of the youngsters who was involved in this network. I've talked to several of them. And he assures me that Jeff Gannon is, in fact, Johnny Gosch. Well, how did Johnny Gosch get from West Des Moines, Iowa, 12 years old, all the way with the phony press pass into the White House as of a few weeks ago? Well, what happened to Johnny is that he was transported from West Des Moines, Iowa to Sioux City. He was placed on a farm for 3 weeks, sexually molested. He was taken to the mountains in Colorado, placed in a cage in a house of some sort, or a cabin, and then later he was used as a sex slave. They didn't kill him, they didn't sacrifice him, although a number of these kids are sacrificed in satanic ceremonies. Now, he escaped with another young man. They stole a car, and in 1997, Johnny knocked on his mother's door at 2:30 in the morning, Noreen Gosch, and said he wanted to talk to her. He was there with another young boy. He came in, he told Noreen, he says, "Mother, I was kidnapped. I've been placed in a covert military CIA-controlled, mind-controlled project and used as a sex slave." He said, "I can't come forward at this time because they will kill me." And then he left. Noreen says that's the last time she talked to him, 1997. Now, several years after that, a girl named Burns, who was a producer for 2020, decided to do a story on the Johnny Gosch kidnapping and the Nebraska case. And she interviewed me. In fact, I spent 5 days with her, gave her the benefit of all my research, which is available to you folks also. And then she got a lead that Johnny was hiding out on an Indian reservation in northern Minnesota. She went there and flushed him out, and he basically went into hiding. And now he shows up at the White House. He was a mind control victim. If you don't know anything about MKUltra mind control program, it came into this country through the German scientists after World War II. They were involved with the Nazis during the war and prior to World War II in developing robots and individuals to be used on command for anything that they wished, including assassinations and other nefarious activity. The MKUltra program, CIA mind control program, was investigated by Congress in 1987. Congress said, CIA, you got to quit doing that. You're bad boys. And they said, we will quit. Don't kid yourself. It's very active today. There are people like Barbara Hartwell out there who are mind control victims. She's another one who's been bashing me. I must be doing a pretty good job because I wouldn't have these people criticizing me on the internet like they do. And of course, it doesn't bother me in the least. But going back to the Nebraska case, MKUltra, a lot of this training took place at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, which was Strategic Air Command headquarters. You recall after 9/11, the president flew to I think it was the south, someplace in Louisiana or New Orleans, and then he flew to Offutt Air Force Base in the afternoon of September the 11th, 01, and they had a party there that morning at 9:30 in the morning. He missed the party. He was sorry he missed the party. Warren Buffett was there, by the way. And the MKUltra program has been very actively administered, not only at Offutt Air Force Base, at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the place where Dr. McDonald's family was slaughtered in 1970. Now, the Nebraska case, I don't want to leave that without telling you that in the early 1990s, Yorkshire TV came to the United States with a camera crew for 7 months to do a documentary on it. They went back to England, produced the documentary, and they brought it over into the United States. It was listed in the TV Guide to be aired on May the 3rd, 1994. When certain members of Congress found out about it, they threatened the cable industry with restrictive legislation. Somebody anonymously bought up the rights to the videotape for the documentary and ordered all copies destroyed. About 6 months ago, as any good investigator would do, I said, I'm going to get a copy of that TV Guide. I didn't have a copy. John DeCamp had one at one time, couldn't find it. That's typical of John, by the way. Good friend, great guy. And so I said, I'm going to get my own copy. So I wrote to TV Guide people, and I received a copy of the TV Guide for May 3rd, 1994. 10 p.m. Discovery Channel. It's not listed. A nature show is listed instead on the new reprinted edition. I'm not going to be outfoxed by these people. I went to the Los Angeles Times TV log. It's listed, Conspiracy of Silence. I called a friend of mine in Philadelphia, and I said, check the TV log for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Conspiracy of Silence is listed in the Philadelphia Inquirer. The power of the press. They changed and reprinted the whole TV Guide. It never has been shown publicly in the United States, and I doubt if it ever will be shown publicly. But as I said, it is available for you.
It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
For John DeCamp, the trail starts in a unique town just outside Omaha.
World-famed Boys Town is in the news again.
Made famous by an Oscar-winning film, Boys Town is America's favorite children's charity. It was founded in 1917 by a Catholic priest, Father Flanagan.
Father Flanagan. The saddest spectacle in our social life is the neglected, unwanted, and unloved boy who has become a serious problem in our society.
Boys Town was started to be a home for orphans. That was after World War I. And since then, society has changed and the problems of boys have changed. And so now it's a question of taking care of homeless, abandoned, neglected, abused boys, and now girls also.
Boys Town has been granted the privileges of an incorporated town, a Catholic diocese, and a school district for 500 children. Boys Town has cash reserves of $500 million, but still raises up to $35 million annually, solicited from the public by begging letters and promotional videos.
I'm Father Val Peter, the caretaker of Father Flanagan's Stream and the executive director of Boys Town. Does Boys Town really exist, people ask me? You bet it does.
Located in the heartland of America, Boys Town youth have come from many backgrounds and locales. As they graduate, they shall seek new adventures and head for different places. But always, they shall carry with them the spirit of Boys Town. If you'd like to help Boys Town, send your tax-deductible gift to Father Val Peter, Boys Town, Nebraska, 68010.
Boys Town, for me, was the first thing I ever heard of when you think of institutions that you respect. Believe it or not, I was there for a while when I was a young boy. When an institution like that gets contaminated, then you better, if you got any decency at all, do something about it, or at least get it cleared up.
John de Camp lays the blame for the contamination of Boys Town on the one-time leader of the National Black Republican Council, Larry King.
Larry King was the fastest rising black star in the entire Republican Party of the United States during all of the 1980s. And he was also one of the most evil individuals in this country in terms of being a dealer of children, in terms of being a thief, 40 million that they documented he stole, and in terms of using and compromising and corrupting one after another politicians.
The base for his network was the Franklin Federal Credit Union, a people's bank in Omaha, Nebraska. Larry King was its general manager.
Thank you. This is especially an exciting day for me.
Mr. King was a very charismatic person. When he came to the credit union, he was brought in because the credit union was actually failing. He did everything to build the credit union.
King courted the leaders of Omaha's wealthy business district. Banks, industry, and charities placed millions of dollars in King's hands. From 1979, Larry King developed close commercial ties to Boys Town, and Boys Town youngsters were sent to work for his companies.
Boys Town had quite a few accounts at Franklin Credit Union. Those were considered very valuable accounts. They were handled exclusively by the bookkeeping department. But on the average of once a month or once every 2 months, we always seemed to incorporate a person from Boys Town.
But King used Boys Town not just as a source of young boys for his business. He prostituted them at sex and drug orgies. Paul Benassi was a victim of King's abuse. He was also sent by King to lure Boys Town youngsters off campus.
We used to just drive around and go up toward the home. That's when we used to do some of the scavenger hunts with picking up some of the kids. You know, just kind of win their confidence, become friends with them for a while. Start inviting them to the parties. The kids were 10 years old or older.
In 1986, King's plundering of Boys Town was reported by staff to its chief executive, Father Val Peter. Subsequent testimony proves that he carried out his own investigation, but that King's victims refused to talk to him. Monsignor Hupp now blames himself for Boys Town's association with Larry King.
Well, in retrospect, I regret having any association with Larry King. Had I known it at the time, it would never have happened.
Could you understand why a very detailed report from a social worker employed at Boys Town, identifying children and identifying their alleged abusers, never saw the light of day? Nothing happened with that.
No, I can understand that, because had I known that had been, I wouldn't put up with that. But is that something like that happened? I don't know of it.
Nebraska has a very clear statute that child abuse allegations should be reported to authorities. They shouldn't be reported to the principal of a school, director of a facility. They should be reported directly to either Child Protective Services or law enforcement.
And so Larry King remained free to feed his pedophilic parties with child victims. But in 1988, a routine review brought King's involvement with Boys Town youth to the attention of Nebraska's State Foster Care Review Board.
in the information presented to the Foster Care Review Board, either via the telephone reports, the personal reports, or the reports we reviewed, Larry King's name was consistently present as someone that the youth were making allegations against. So I would say we handed over at least a foot-high amount of material to authorities, and nothing happened.
Omaha police now accept that Larry King may have been abusing children.
Good morning, Roberta.
Good morning, Steve.
But its most senior officer claims the evidence was not conclusive.
It is certainly possible that Mr. King was involved in illegal acts with children. If there was sufficient evidence of those types of allegations, he would have been prosecuted by the county attorney's office.
For me, it was very clear that the case was not investigated and not pursued because of the alleged perpetrators.
Those perpetrators, named by the children, were some of the richest and most influential citizens in positions of power in the state, men prominent in industry, politics, the media, even the police. We can only name the ringleaders. Besides Larry King, they were department store millionaire Alan Baer and the celebrity columnist of Omaha's only newspaper, the World Herald, Peter Citron. With the judicial system apparently paralyzed, Larry King spent Franklin's money on courting political influence. $10 million went on jewelry, flowers, and private planes. He cultivated contacts in the inner circles of Ronald Reagan's White House. At his palatial homes, 3 in Omaha and 1 in Washington, D.C., he held extravagant parties for the influential and powerful. His lavish spending bought him a protected life.
Larry King was constantly heralded, cheered, applauded in the news media as the great businessman that's helping the poor people, the black community of Omaha.
But King's extravagance attracted the attention of the Internal Revenue Service. As a result, on April the 11th, 1988, the Franklin Credit Union was raided and closed by the FBI. King was arrested, and the federal investigation showed he had stolen $40 million from Franklin. Documents we possess reveal the FBI interviewed many of the victims of Larry King's sex ring, but no action was taken. In November 1988, Nebraska's state government set up a parallel investigation into Larry King. A legislative committee was formed. Its chairman was the Republican head of Nebraska's Banking Committee, corn farmer and state senator Loren Schmidt. Immediately, anonymous threats began.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Loren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans."
Undeterred, the committee began their investigations, and the money trail led quickly to the original allegations of child abuse. Carolyn Stitt was one of the first to testify.
The night before we testified before the legislative committee, I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
To protect the inquiry, Schmidt's committee hired special legal counsel and full-time professional investigators Gary Caradori and Karen Ormiston.
I said, "We do not want you to bring to the committee rumors, innuendos, nothing that cannot be backed up with facts." I said, "Bring to the committee that which we can take to a prosecutor."
The investigators found new victims of King's pedophile network, many on the streets of Omaha. The picture they built up was of a large ring of rich and powerful pedophiles, many named the same men as those involved with the Boys Town cases 3 years earlier.
They were telling us about prominent people in Omaha and elsewhere that were abusing children at parties?
The prominent citizens' names that originally came up were of concern to me because I knew many of those individuals, and I, very frankly, was shocked to have those names show up on the list.
To provide the committee with hard evidence, the investigators recorded their new witnesses on videotape. Paul Bonacci had been the victim of abuse since he was 8. He was present at many of Larry King's sex parties. Caradori traced him to the county jail. He had been convicted of fondling his young cousin.
Who were some of these people that would come to these parties?
Larry King, Peter Citron came once in a while. He didn't seem like he wasn't liked by the people.
Media personality Peter Citron procured some of his victims from Boys Town.
The kids he liked were mainly around the age of probably about 8 and 13. It was mainly fondling and oral sex with them. He did have some anal sex, but he usually did that with the older kids.
The parties involved ever more sadistic abuse.
Whenever you were tied up, was there anybody else present other than you, Peter Citron?
Yes.
Who was that?
It was Alan Bear sometimes.
Millionaire Alan Bear hosted parties for a large number of sadistic pedophiles. Paul Bonacci suffered at their hands.
Okay.
Yeah. They tied me up and I had some other kids perform sex on me and they both hitting me and they burned me some cigarettes.
Okay. Just take a deep breath now.
And cross with Troy Bonner.
Troy Bonner would tie you up?
He was there.
Troy Bonner was found by the investigators and his videotape testimony taken under oath.
I was shocked when I walked in. There was a kid, I would say about 15 years old, out in the middle of the room. One guy was standing in front of him. He was bent over, and the other guy was like reaching under him, playing with his nipples, while a guy whom Jeff told me was a police officer shoving beads up his rectum.
The police officer was shoving beads up his rectum?
Yes.
Bonner named Alan Bear as the man who introduced him to the sex parties.
Alan Bear was a sick. Didn't care, wanted sex, nasty, I don't even know if you can call it sex. Everything, from just, touching to fruit, squash, huge squash, that big around, stuck into you. Heat things, hot things, poked at you and
But the center of the child sex ring was Larry King.
Larry King was the same kind of Alan Bear was, except Larry King was more violent, more sure of himself, I got those scars on my arm one night at a party where Larry King, wanted to see how strong a man we were or something, and have us push our arms together, and then you'd light cigarettes, and as soon as you get burning, you just drop them down between your arms and, let it burn. And they made us stand there naked and touch each other while holding our arms together and burn cigarettes where, it's on film someplace. They filmed it, burning, I would, see him, a 10-year-old boy in the, just and, push him down, and then go out and, meet with decent people.
King would also provide underage girls for abuse. Alicia Owen told the investigators she was 15 when she attended her first party, introduced by a Boys Town boy. Caradori discovered her in jail where she was serving a sentence for passing bad checks.
I met some guys there that were from Boys Town, and it was at that party that I met Larry King. At the time that I met Larry King, I did not know that he was Larry King. I had met him. That was the first time I'd ever met him.
Larry King and Alan Baer frequently hosted the child sex parties in penthouse apartments at the Twin Towers luxury block in Omaha.
A lot of it was me handcuffed with my hands behind my head and my feet tied and doing different things.
What do you mean?
Sometimes there'd be a guy straddling over my face.
Okay.
Most of the time, Larry King took pictures quite a bit during that time.
I know it's difficult.
I don't know.
Okay.
And I think I could have said no.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Okay. And you know, Alicia, you're a victim. And at the young age, let's go off camera for a minute.
We were appalled. Appalled. I don't even know if it comes across on the video the way it came across to us in person. It was incredible. It's incredible what these kids went through, I think.
Larry King was also here. He came in and we drank and did cocaine. I didn't do much. He turned me on to what Larry King did.
Drugs was a strong part of how they got control of some of the kids, because that's what some of the kids were there to get. They would do the sexual acts and then be provided with cocaine or whatever type of drug they wanted.
Heroin, you know, I don't know, but that was my drug of choice, you know. Till this day, I remain an addict, you know.
And those of us that didn't like to be involved and didn't want to be involved were threatened.
Oh, so any, and who would do these threatening remarks?
Larry King.
Do you think Larry King personally did?
Well, I think he did. And when they threatened, you know, that I can go find somebody that will kill you, and it will kill your family, you don't tell anybody.
Larry King was, I would say, the center of transporting the children around the country. The airplanes were usually in his name, at least in his name. They were paid for by Larry King.
We met them in Pasadena.
Met who in Pasadena?
We met, Larry King was there. There was 3 boys that I had seen at one of the receptions at the French Cafe were there. And I'm almost positive they were Boys Town boys. Almost positive. They were there.
You mean graduates of Boys Town or present?
I think they were present because they were young.
Well, how would they get away for a long period of time?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Boys Town came up frequently during the investigation, but we found it very difficult to get information about Boys Town. I was not able to find any information on my visit there, and Mr. Caradori could not get information either.
Boys Town today remains unwilling to discuss its involvement with Larry King. We were banned from filming at Boys Town, and its public affairs officer refused any interviews.
I would have to give you a flat no. I'm just going to tell you at this point that we will not participate with you. We have no interest in talking to you folks. It's something that we don't even care to delve into.
The children I have talked to have all had to murder before the age of 2. I mentioned that last week, and we kind of went right on past it. That is something that is beyond anything I could comprehend.
Right.
But in some way, whether with the help of an adult's hand over theirs, or by having them practice, by getting them excited to be part of the adult scene — these children have never seen a normal life, for goodness sakes — they do murder. And the evil thing that happens is they really believe they want to. They want to do what the older people are doing, and they're praised for that. And that becomes their goal, to be like the adults and to do these horrible things. There is a little part in them that I believe we all have, that natural, good, God-given part that knows it's wrong. But in a group and in the excitement of everything, they want to do that. They enjoy the sex. Children are capable of enjoying the sex. That was something I didn't know. Well, you know, why would they fight against it? A child will eat a bag of candy if you give it to them. They will take part in these things willingly. When they get out and begin to talk, that's very difficult for them to realize. We didn't realize it at first, that they actually wanted to do that, and that is part of the very sophisticated brainwashing job that they do on all of these children. The part that made me to believe this child's story was that when he finally said, this baby, he talked about several, but this particular baby had been killed, stabbed again, different way, but stabbed. He curled up in a fetal position. He was 9 years old when he was telling this story. He curled up in a fetal position, and his eyes got real glazed, and he said, they cooked that baby on the grill.
Oh, my gosh.
And I thought, he has really flipped out. I mean, I didn't know. And he said, oh, gross, it smelled like rotten chicken or rotten deer. He then went on and told us how they would cut out the heart, or they would cut off the sex organs. They would save them in the refrigerator, in the freezer. And this is a very typical thing that these kids talk about. They worship the sex organs. I suppose they're so into themselves, and it is life and nature and all of that. I don't, and it's very decadent, deviant. It is nothing a Christian person would care to even hear about. So that is part of the reason, I'm sure, that they do that. But he witnessed that, and they kept it for another ceremony. They will always use these bodies one way or another. I didn't get any answers from that child about what happened to the bodies. Where did they go? Eventually, the little ones that I was talking about first talked about throwing the babies in the fire. And I asked about that, and you mean they were dead and then they threw them in the fire? And the littlest one said, no, them was alive, and them threw them, you know, like this. The most horrible story about fire that I have to tell, and this is extremely, extremely disturbing, was a little girl. She is a teenager, as she was telling me this story. And she was describing the barn where they used to go to have their meetings. And she told how they would gather outside of the barn and do their chanting. And then as they went on into the barn, they would be split into different groups. And she was never with any of her family. They all went to different places. And I asked her where she had to go, and she said, oh, I was always in the burning room. And as she went on and described the burning room, I thought, how she came out of this with any sanity at all, I don't know. She was very small child. They would take young children, and we're probably talking preschoolers. I don't think that they dealt much with the older ones. And they would hang them from a rafter in this barn. And there would be as many as 5 to 10 hung in a row. And they would be fully clothed, which is unusual because frequently they are all naked. The children, like this girl, were all given candles. And you can picture the ceremony as she described it. And the candles were lit one by one. Then the adults would go forward and they would pour from a cup some liquid on each of the children's clothing, which is obviously gasoline or kerosene, because we know that then. And then after whatever it was they had to do, they would give the signal, and these others would have to go forward and set the children on fire. When they were done, they would just cut them down. The first child that this girl had to kill was a cousin, a little cousin. You know, what does that do to you? What does it do to your insides? But you couldn't object, because the children that objected were killed. Frequently, she said, people would come. They'd come as families, like we would go to some big festive gathering, not knowing that their child would be sacrificed. And she would describe the screams of the parents when they realized that their child had been killed. And she talked about them being cut down and how they would draw a circle around the body. And when she first told me those things, I knew she was telling the truth. It wasn't that, but I didn't understand it. And I still can't tell you every answer, but I know that circles are important. And during these rituals, they will draw the circles, or in some way they will have a circle, because they believe that these demons that come can't break through the circle to harm them. She had also told about how the parents would kneel outside that circle where the child had fallen to, like, pray to the child, is what she said. I've been told by people that know a lot more than I do that the reason for all of this death and murder is because of the belief in the demons and the power that they can get from that. And these people believe that the more innocent the victim, the more horrible the death, the closer you are at the moment of death, the more magic is released and the more spiritual power they get.
By the spring of 1990, the Nebraska State Committee was convinced by the evidence of an organized child abuse ring. Its chairman, Lawrence Schmidt, sought the advice of his lawyer, John DeCamp. On his advice, Schmidt turned over all the sworn evidence to the FBI. But immediately, the videotape testimony was leaked to a hostile local media.
The media immediately started discrediting the witnesses. They were, the witnesses came across in the media, in the Omaha World-Herald, especially, as the criminals.
The last 3 victim witnesses were demolished by the press, particularly the Omaha World-Herald. The paper never looked for information that would support any of the allegations. The whole purpose of the stories was to destroy any credibility that these youth may have.
I've heard that people said that Gary Caradori coached me and that he told me what to say, but the fact was I didn't meet Gary Caradori until way after I'd already talked to the Omaha police about the abuse and had named all the same people.
Paul Benassi maintains that neither the FBI nor the Omaha police took his allegations seriously.
And they didn't ask me very much about Larry King or even Alan Baer at all. They treated the allegations that I made about the people who abused me almost like a joke.
The stories were of such significance that the investigators first wanted to prove the accuracy of the stories. As they set about the investigation of the 3, initially 3 and then a 4th person who were telling the stories, as the investigation developed, it became obvious to the investigators that the information was not accurate, that in fact it was an entire conspiracy of allegations, none of which had any truth to them.
I was very disappointed with the way the FBI and law enforcement treated the victims. They, in fact, turned them into the offenders, so to speak. And instead of taking the evidence that was delivered to them by the victims and interrogating the persons whom the victims identified, they seemed to bear down and try to get the victims to change their story.
It seemed to the investigators that the establishment of Omaha was closing ranks. Then Troy Bonner was brought in for questioning by the FBI.
The FBI's attitude was, just no, these kind of things don't happen. From the first interview when I went, and realized they don't believe the fucking thing I'm saying, they were just appalled, but I realized what that look in their eye was back then. It was fear. It was fear of it, I had witnessed, firsthand things that would, destroy this city, people, a position, what I mean? It's not going to be believed, they said. It will not be believed. You will be found guilty of perjury, and they weren't telling me maybe. They were saying, there's no way. You go on with this story, you're going to jail. That was said to me direct.
Troy Bonner agreed to withdraw his videotape testimony. The FBI used Troy in an attempt to persuade fellow witness Alicia Owen into abandoning her evidence about Larry King's nationwide network of powerful pedophiles. We have obtained the recording of the phone call made by the FBI on March the 9th, 1990. It is significant evidence for John DeCamp.
This is Special Agent. Following will be a consensually recorded telephone call between Troy Bonner and Alicia Owen.
Hello. Hi. Hey, what's going on?
I'd like to ask you that.
Talk to me.
No, you talk to me. I don't understand why you're lying. Why are you lying?
What are you talking about?
That's what I'm asking you.
You're calling me why I'm lying?
Yeah.
You concocted this whole thing, Alicia.
You're full of shit.
Either tell me what's going on.
You're full of
Hey, look.
Who do you have listening on this line?
I have nobody listening to me. I'm listening to you, and I'm hoping you'd give me some answers.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know what kind of game you're playing.
I'm not trying to play a game. I'm not going to go to jail for you. And that's what's going to happen.
Why would you go to jail? Jail for telling the truth?
No, jail for lying.
What have you lied about?
I haven't lied.
Okay, then, but why are...
Listen, shut up. Listen to me. You're not out here being talked to them every day. The pressure's kind of hard.
You literally have to have bricks for brains to take on the FBI in this country. And that's exactly what you'd have to do this properly. They now, in my opinion, in my investigation, are the architects of the cover-up.
We asked the FBI in Omaha for an interview about its investigation of the Franklin scandal.
Larry Holmquist with the FBI here. We feel it would be inappropriate for us to comment. We work this with the Omaha Police Department, and we just don't feel it would be appropriate for us to make comments.
As the investigators sought out new witnesses, they found themselves under constant threat.
Gary was threatened several times. His vehicles were tampered with. I would think whoever tampered with them, it was a scare tactic because it was so obvious that they were being tampered with.
Gary it was one piece of evidence I know he got that he even said he got one step ahead of him this time. He told us about this book. It was like addresses, telephone numbers, names. He said if they knew he had it, they'd kill him.
On July the 11th, 1990, Gary Caradori and his 8-year-old son AJ were flying home from Chicago in his light aircraft. They had watched the All-Star baseball game, and Caradori had been pursuing new leads.
Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board are in Harold Cameron's cornfield trying to determine what caused this private plane to crash, killing its 2 occupants.
The bodies of Gary Caradori and 8-year-old AJ were found in the wreckage.
National Transportation Safety Board investigators say wreckage from the crash is apparently strewn over a 3/4 to 1 mile long stretch in this field.
The fact that the wreckage is scattered over a large area certainly demonstrates that it did break up in flight. The exact mechanism of breakup yet is still unknown.
The federal investigation was never able to discover what tore the plane apart.
There are things missing from the plane. His briefcase is missing. I think the plane was sabotaged. There's no doubt in my mind.
Within 24 hours of the tragedy, all Caradori's records were impounded by the FBI. But Gary Caradori's death pricked Troy Bonner's conscience. He promised Sandy that he would tell Senator Schmidt's committee about the FBI's pressure which led him to lie.
I set the record straight. I was, going to do it. And would, the truth would come out, and somebody would be held accountable for his death. And then at the funeral I had seen, FBI guys, and they looked at me. I was supposed to meet Senator Labetz and Schmidt for lunch after the funeral. And, that's when I decided, I told my mom, we're not going to do the lunch. We're going to hightail it out of Lincoln now.
Troy Bonner claims that pressure from the FBI and, with the assistance of the county attorney's office in Omaha, led him to swear a new statement claiming that he and Alicia Owen had concocted the entire child abuse story. He told this story to the grand jury formed to bring any charges. On July the 23rd, 1990, the grand jury issued a bizarre and contradictory report. It indicted Larry King for fraud and embezzlement and ruled that he had paid young men for sex but dismissed allegations about his sex ring. It indicted Alan Baer for the serious offence of pandering for sex, but rejected evidence linking him to King or to Citron, whom it noted had been convicted of separate child molestation charges. It accepted that Troy, Alicia, and Paul Bonacci had been abused, but not by the people they identified, and for refusing to withdraw her evidence, it charged Alicia Owen with perjury. Lawrence Schmidt's legislative committee issued a report denouncing the grand jury. Schmidt acknowledges that the system failed both the victims and him.
I had, I think, as distinguished a record as anyone could put together in 24 years. I was told that would be curtailed, and it was. I was told I'd have financial problems, and I did. The message was not lost on most politicians in Nebraska. I think the message that was delivered was, if any legislative committee ever tries to conduct a thorough investigation again, the same thing will happen. It has shaken my faith in the institutions of government. I used to be a firm believer that the system would work, and that people who did things wrong would be punished. And we discovered victims who claimed to have been abused and who the grand jury acknowledged had been abused. But they did not try to find out who had abused those individuals. Instead, they convicted Alicia Owen of perjury. Indefensible from my point of view.
The trial took place in July 1991. Troy Bonner testified that the child abuse story had been an invention. As a result, Alicia Owen was sentenced to between 9 and 25 years in prison.
I can't find a case in the history of this country where some kid got sentenced to 25 or 30 years in prison for something like this. If you were going to pick a what I call a tell sign, something that says something's fishy about the whole thing, it was in the sentencing itself. For some reason, they had to send a signal to every kid who was a potential witness. My opinion again. A signal so loud and clear, if you dare to come forward, if you dare to talk, watch what happens.
Alan Baer was fined $500 after pleading no contest to a reduced charge of aiding and abetting prostitution. Peter Citron served 2 years of a 3 to 8 year sentence. Thanks to Troy Bonner's lies, Larry King never faced child sex charges. For the $40 million fraud, he was given a 15-year sentence, 10 years less than Alicia Owen.
I feel really sick. I should be taken out and shot for doing that. And if that was to happen, I would go willingly.
John DeCamp believes that the legal system is still being subverted and that the people protected are still at the heart of the American establishment. He hopes that this program will expose a serious miscarriage of justice, but the opposition is formidable.
It's beyond belief that arguably the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States, in the form of Richard Nixon, could not prevent the investigation of Watergate, or that President Reagan could not prevent the investigation of Iran-Contra, and yet somehow this group of unnamed, unknown, anonymous individuals in Omaha, Nebraska have such power they can control and protect all of these people from being investigated. Those allegations are ridiculous.
Well, first of all, Nixon did cover up Watergate. Number one. Bush did cover up Iran-Contra, at least officially. And Omaha has successfully covered up this situation. In each case, it was the press that exposed the problem. It wasn't institutions of government. They had been corrupted. They had been compromised. They were the ones doing the cover-up.